Who was John Brown? Should we view him as a terrorist? Should he be viewed as a righteous liberator? Or shall he be viewed as a patriot?
On Sunday evening, October 16, 1859, John Brown and 21 followers took armed possession of the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. They intended to confiscate rifles and launch a massive slave insurrection to free the nation's 4 million slaves. Reactions to the raid were varied. John Brown was like the best of those who stood at our bridge once, on Lexington Common, and on Bunker Hill, only he was firmer and higher principled. Henry David Thoreau. John Brown's martyrdom, if it shall be perfected, will make the gallows as glorious as the cross. Ralph Waldo Emerson. John Brown was a blood-stained fanatic. Nobody was ever more justly hanged. His raid was a preposterous miscalculation of possibilities. Nathaniel Hawthorne. John Brown's effort was peculiar. An enthusiast broods over the oppression of a people till he fancies himself commissioned by heaven to liberate them. He ventures the attempt, which ends in little else than his own execution. Abraham Lincoln. Brown was already known as an anti-slavery activist. In 1856, settlers in Kansas were battling to determine whether the territory would become a free or a slave state. At Potawatomi, Brown led a group that brutally murdered 5 pro-slavery settlers. In the Northeast, Brown collected money to fund an invasion of the slave-holding South. His principal supporters became known as the Secret Six. Brown targeted the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, partly to protest the federal government's tolerance of slavery. On Monday morning, local residents awoke to what they thought was a robbery. 4 civilians were killed by Brown's men. Others were severely wounded. The townspeople and 12 neighboring militia units attacked the insurgents, killing 10 and forcing Brown and his remaining men to retreat into the arsenal's fire engine house. President James Buchanan dispatched a contingent of U.S. Marines under the command of Robert E. Lee. The Marines stormed the engine house. 2 of the insurgents and 1 Marine were killed. 12 of Brown's 21 men were now dead. 5, including Brown, would later be hanged. Virginia Governor Henry Wise interrogated Brown and was astounded by his admission that his plan was to incite slave insurrection throughout the South. At his trial, Brown justified his action on Christian principles. He wrote eloquent explanations from Charleston jail that carefully omitted mention of the violence he had incited or the human slaughter that would have accompanied a major slave revolt. The letters and his courtroom testimony caused many to reassess Brown. To the dismay of many in the North, Virginia executed John Brown on December 2, 1859. Not a single slave had been freed, but the raid forced Americans to reconsider the institution that had plagued the nation since its founding. Southern secessionists welcomed the raid as an opportunity to unify public opinion in support of disunion. Northern reaction was remarkably varied. Some eulogized Brown as a martyr whose death would open the way to emancipation. Such outpourings outraged not only Southerners, but also many conservatives in the North. Businessmen whose prosperity was linked to the slave economy of the South staged union meetings in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia that attracted thousands. European commentators were appalled that Americans would execute an opponent of slavery. When we think of what Brown, this liberator, this fighter for Christ, attempted, and when we reflect that he is to die slaughtered by the American Republic, we recoil with horror. Victor Hugo. African Americans steadfastly revered the man who Frederick Douglass said began the war that ended American slavery. Today, at last, we know John Brown was right. Slavery is wrong, he said. Kill it. It had to die by revolution, not by milder means. W.E.B. Du Bois, 1909. John Brown's name still brings powerful emotions to the surface. His raid continues to inspire debate about issues of liberation, justice, vigilantism, and terrorism. Does an individual have the right to carry out violent acts based on conscience? Does a noble end justify a bloody means? Is Brown so different from today's bombers, from Oklahoma City to Iraq, who attempt to galvanize public opinion to force political and social change? Following Harper's Ferry, many Americans who had dismissed ideas of secession and armed conflict moved rapidly toward more militant positions. Without John Brown, the Civil War might not have happened. Which John Brown should we remember? The crusader for the abolition of slavery, or the bloodthirsty terrorist? Can we separate them? Is it possible to list him among the pantheon of American heroes, or do we still recoil at the thought of men hacked to pieces in Kansas, or his treasonous attack on an American military installation?